Hey, I'm Rachel,
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
powered by DoorDash. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Beyond a Ballot. Canada is in the middle of a family fight. Not the polite, passive-aggressive kind where someone just stops calling, but the loud kind where old grievances are finally getting said out loud, where the word separation is appearing on ballot petitions and in mainstream conversations, including here, and where two of the country's most powerful premiers can't agree on a pipeline, a coastline, or whether the other one is acting in good faith and if someone's getting a better deal. Alberta says it's been shortchanged for decades by equalization, by federal energy policy, by canceled pipelines, and carbon taxes designed, some argue, with the oil sands squarely in mind. The frustration isn't new, but the temperature is rising. British Columbia, on the other hand, says it's the one holding a coastline in trust for Indigenous nations, for our ecosystem, for a tourism and fisheries economy that British Columbia has that doesn't survive a major oil spill. It says it's already said yes to Trans Mountain, already taken the environmental and political risks, and that saying no to a northern route isn't obstructionist, it's just governance. Ottawa's trying to hold everybody together. And while also needing Alberta's cooperation on trade and energy security, and frankly, on keeping the country from fracturing along its western seam, while its seam in Quebec is also starting to unravel. And underneath all of this is a question that Canadians don't ask very often. Is the Federation actually fair? Are some provinces carrying more than their share and getting less in return? And if the answer is yes, what do you do about it? Do you reform the system? Do you fight harder within it? Or do you start collecting signatures? Today, we're getting into it with political insiders from both sides of the Rockies and who are not going to agree on very much. Maybe they will. I don't know. Raj Sihota is vice president at Strategies 360 and one of the most seasoned political operatives in British Columbia. She served as executive director of the BC NDP, was a key architect of both the 2017 and 2020 election campaigns that brought the NDP to government in BC, and has spent more than 2 decades as a senior advisor to leaders, legislators, and campaigns across the province. She knows how BC thinks, how BC decides, and how BC digs in. Erika Barootes comes at this from the other side of the mountains and the other side of the political equation. She's the founding president of the United Conservative Party, former principal secretary to Premier Danielle Smith, and one of Alberta's sharpest political voices. She's also Alberta's senator-elect for Lesser Slave Lake. So she's about to take Alberta's case directly to Ottawa if that vote ever happens. She's been one of the clearest and most candid voices on what Alberta actually wants from this federation and what happens if it doesn't get its way. Welcome, Erika and Raj.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you, Rachel. Hi, Erika.
Hi. We're just meeting too, so that's fun.
I know, and I can't believe the two of you have never met because you're both such amazing, brilliant people and part of my life. And I'm very fortunate to know both of you. So this was my dream to bring you together. And here we are on a week that has been so interesting for everybody across the country, but specifically for those of us in British Columbia and Alberta. So why don't we start from the very beginning for people that are listening that maybe haven't been following this very closely, but they've seen David Eby, they've seen Danielle Smith in the news a lot this week. Tell us what's going on. And we'll start with Erika, because I want you to break down for us the Alberta side. And then Raj, of course, you're in British Columbia. You tell us about what's going on in BC. So Erika?
Well, the easiest way I can explain it is two colleagues having a fight at the water cooler over and over every single day on repeat. And so what we're seeing is competing interests, two individuals wanting to further their own careers, if we're using this water cooler, and the other one kind of getting in the way or stepping on the other person's toes to impress the boss and get what they want, which in this case is Mark Carney. And so from the Alberta perspective, I mean, there's lots happening internally, but the big goal on the interrelations is Alberta's landlocked and they've got to go through BC to get a new pipeline built. And they're working really hard for the last several months and building that relationship with Ottawa, something that we've never seen in the last decade at least, of that relationship between the province of Alberta and the federal government. But meanwhile, while those conversations are happening, the other colleague who doesn't feel like they're getting the same type of attention from the boss is feeling a little bit left out on their projects or on what their say in this pipeline would be. And we saw that from the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, and Mark Carney announcing, further updates to their MOU that they signed. Industrial carbon pricing meeting on that negotiation. Meanwhile, no other colleagues or players were at the table. And one of them that's very important is Premier David Eby, who, is very impacted by the changes to methane, to electricity changes, and to changes to obviously industrial carbon pricing, because that impacts what he does every day. And so I'm sure we'll get into it. I think one is maybe handling it better and more professionally than another, but we can get into that a little bit later on the show. But I think that's probably the thing is we have two people that are competing for their priorities and their goals, and they're not being currently given the same amount of attention, or at least that's how they feel.
Raj, would you agree with that?
If we're going to stick with the colleagues and the water cooler metaphor, then yes, let's go with that. I mean, we do have a new boss in the form of Mark Carney. So when there's a new boss, there is always a little, how are we going to impress the new boss? What projects will we bring to the table? And do my colleagues have better projects than I do? Will my projects get resourced, or will my colleagues' projects get resourced? And some of our projects are dependent upon each other. So what Alberta needs for economic growth very much depends on being able to move resources through British Columbia to Tidewater and out to the world through our West Coast ports. So, and that is why you see Premier Eby perhaps a little on edge, a little angry. I heard him last week. And I think that anger is out of frustration that we do have this relationship that is dependent upon each other, and Alberta has to work and BC has to work, but together we would work better together. And of course, this week is the Western Premiers Conference in Kananaskis being hosted in Alberta, and they just started this morning, so we don't have a lot of news out of it yet. And but what we do know is that national projects of national interest, how we move the Canadian economy now in light of our stresses with our American neighbors. And these conversations are always important. And in British Columbia, they become particularly heated because British Columbia has a very, very strong environmental lobby. And urban voters tend to look at these projects differently than rural voters. And these are, by and large, rural jobs. So you have the classic urban-rural divide that always takes place in British Columbia. And then you have a new prime minister with a new, a new motivation for what Canada's place in the world is. And a premier, Premier Eby, who, as far as the NDP premiers of the last decade go, is actually much more friendly to big projects, has been much more open to them because of the debate that's happened over the last 10 years. And part of that was Premier Clark and the 5 conditions for pipelines. British Columbians are just much more aware overall about what their value in this is. It's not just moving resources to our province, but how are we going to benefit? And so everybody wants their project to be funded by the Prime Minister. Some projects are funded, some projects are not. Everyone's looking for resources to fund their projects, and that's where the tension is coming from.
The Prime Minister made a couple of comments over the last week or so, and he talked about the fact that a third of those projects are going to BC. I'm curious. I always feel when I hear Premier EB speak, I feel for him because I think you are between a rock and a hard place. I mean, you want the projects funded. There's an environmentalist movement. There's the consultations, the duty to consult with Aboriginal communities. And then there's just this desire, an overwhelmingly momentum behind a desire to build a pipeline. What does Premier EB do with all of these current pressures on him?
Well, I mean, I think he becomes very frustrated, as was evident last week. And, and I think there is a little bit of, I'm feeling, that he's feeling like he's the meat in the sandwich, but he's not the first premier to have faced the situation. And, so you can sense his frustration, right? There's no proponent. There's all these pieces that aren't together. But, Alberta is always so much more clear about what they want, whereas British Columbia always has to, it doesn't matter who the premier is. You always have to manage more risk in British Columbia. And it's risk from the courts, based around Indigenous consultation. It's risk from urban voters. It's, being very mindful of the urban-rural split. So it just takes longer to get things done in British Columbia because you have to do things in a way that will stand up to the scrutiny to a very litigious province, really, when you think about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I want to talk, Erika, about Danielle Smith and what she's thinking, because here is a premier who has gotten a pipeline project further than we have seen in recent history. I was in the room the other day when the Prime Minister was talking in British Columbia, and he said that if BC becomes, stands in the way, they will look elsewhere. I can only imagine, Danielle Smith's team was like high-fiving each other at that point. But can you tell us a little bit about the Premier's office in Alberta and what they are thinking at this moment?
Yeah, and it actually comes back to something that Raj was saying about they've been very clear on their ask. They had 9 bad policy problems from the outset. I think Smith has been very direct and outward in her communication. She's done it publicly in advance by releasing those 9 things. She's like, I'm going into this as months and months ago, but like going into a meeting with the new Prime Minister, and here's what Alberta is expecting as part of Confederation. And so I think it's very different communication styles you see between Premier EB and Premier Danielle Smith. She's very much like asking for the Cadillac, and if she gets a Honda Civic, like she's still winning. Notice I didn't have electric cars in there,
No,
but but she, so she's asking for everything, and she's got a lot of that list. And so I think she's going on the offensive side of things, where we're seeing Premier David Eby very much on the defense. I mean, I can empathize for him in the sense that you were like left out of the room for conversations. But I don't think he handled it in the way that maybe it came across very frustrated. You're allowed to be frustrated, but I think he almost flirted with the line of whining about it. And then you had the boss come out and meet with you the day after this announcement in Alberta last week about the industrial carbon pricing and the 1 million barrels that will be, as early as September 2027 shovels in the ground for, all without a proponent. Like, again, I think Danielle Smith keeps setting her goalposts and hitting getting the ball through. And so commend her for that and being relentless on what she's expecting. And I think that's kind of what we'll continue to see from her, because so far it's working. I think that maybe where I see some options for David Eby is in his communication style. Even yesterday, going into the Western Premiers Conference, he, was like, "It's awkward that we're talking about anything like defense, and we're talking about trade barriers and interprovincial opportunities when we've got this referendum question looming." And it's like, well, everyone else seems to be coming to the table, having those conversations, and their media veil that just happened expressed that they still talked about all those things. So it just almost seemed like he was coming from a very different narrative than even his NDP counterpart in Wab Canoe. So we'll see Smith continue to be relentless with this. I mean, she's got the most to lose because of the referendum coming forward. And there's way more. I've never lived in BC, but way more frustration with Ottawa, I think, than even David Eby could express in the province of Alberta. And so I think we're going to continue to see that, like, we'll ask for everything and we expect most of it kind of tone.
The official agenda, I think, was for the Western Premiers meeting was the economy, energy, security, defense, nation building projects. But given everything that's happening, what is your gut? Did they get into any of those things, or was it solely focused on this pipeline?
I mean, I think the pipeline is such a symbol for all those other things, right? I mean, in fact, it captures all those. So the issues would remain the same, I think, no matter which project that they're talking about. But I just want to go back to something Erika said about framing and how Premier Eby and how he may not have the right frame for this, Erika. I think you are right about this, because I think British Columbians don't want to see that. They want a little bit of anger at Ottawa. Let's face it, all Western provinces, the reason we have a Western Premiers Conference is because in 1973, Western Premiers decided that they needed to have their own conversation because Ottawa wasn't listening to them and Ottawa wasn't acting in a coordinated way. So I think when you go to the Western Premiers Conference, I think you kind of have to go on with your hat of we're all Western premiers together. I mean, I think that's kind of a must. And obviously discussions happen, and Alberta and BC have a huge issue in front of them right now. But Danielle Smith is doing everything she needs to. She's a good negotiator. She's negotiating for the Cadillac. And then Premier Eby has to frame himself into that, but she's leading the frame. She's made the frame. Like, she is the architect. She has designed the house. And I think Premier Eby has to stop walking into her frame and really articulate clearly, like other leaders in British Columbia have before him, about why or what are the conditions for which this may or may not happen. And I think his top line messaging is quite fine. There is no proponent, but that's not enough when you have a premier who is very sad on having this be the conversation nationally. So you're absolutely right, Erika. It is a communications challenge. And I think one of the things that Premier Eby can do to help himself is to frame better what British Columbians are hoping out of any new projects working with Alberta.
Before we dive into the Premier's Conference, because I do want to talk about that, but Raj, in your experience with the BC NDP, is there going to be a time where David Eby could get to a place of supporting this pipeline? He's obviously in a weird political position, holding a very small majority in the legislature in BC. So a lot of political pressure on him, and the base of the NDP provincially, and those environmental issues, Indigenous issues. Are we all just holding our breath for something that will never happen?
If you look at the debates around, the twinning of the Trans-Canada, the Northern Gateway, there are some real examples we can look at where how these projects didn't move forward or how they did, right? So, and I think, the Indigenous relations piece has progressed so much over this last decade. That is a real piece. And that is something that the Premier cannot solve on his own. So in terms of truncated timelines that everyone's talking, that's not feasible from anything I've seen in terms of how things move in British Columbia, in terms of discussions, in terms of consultation, and in terms of real obligation that proponents have um, to Indigenous nations, to environmental assessment, so forth, right? So this idea that everything can be done this quickly, it's very, very ambitious. But we already have a premier that's frustrated, Premier Eby. So the timeline already seems very unrealistic. So you can be as far out as you want in terms of what you want in negotiations, but rubber hits the road in terms of real processes, and those aren't going to be sped up, as far as I can tell, in any way. And it's certainly too early to say which pieces could be sped up.
Erika, do you think Smith won them over with the cowboy boots? For those that don't know.
Oh my gosh. So cowboy boots, that's big. I hope they got really good ones, because those things can be very uncomfortable until you break them in. So
David
I hope
Eby looked a little uncomfortable. I will say that.
He's like, oh, thank you for my cowboy boot. He did it in their joint presser today. It was like, thank you, and even like pointed it out. I'm like,
for those that don't know, the Western Premiers Conference, Premier Smith promised them all cowboy boots. It looks like she delivered on that. And Premier Eby did do his press conference in those boots yesterday. But seriously, Erika, what do you think the message is leaving that conference for Premier Smith and her team? Like, did they win points by hosting this thing? We saw, David Eby, for the record, did bring a gift as well. He brought a Team Canada jersey, and everyone was wearing the Canada jerseys, which is, a throw to Canadian unity. So what, like, post-conference, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think gifts are one thing. A lot of times they're well thought out by the political staffers for photo op purposes. Or I know Wabkanu also brought kind of a local Alberta sweatshirt for the premier from one of their local vendors. So, they all do their dog and pony show about it. Do I think that everyone's going to be BFFs after this? No. Do I think that Eby and Smith are both professionals and will be cordial and talk about those joint items? I think defense is a fair, big conversation to have. I think technology and interprovincial trade is a huge conversation. On the Team Canada, though, one of my, I guess, beefs with Eby is that you can't say you're part of Team Canada and then say, well, we have the coast and therefore we can make or break this. And so I think it's really hard to see that Team Canada approach, where alternatively Wabkanu has come out and be like, Port of Churchill, open for business. Hey, we'll take it, right? And so very, very interesting, because those two are both NDP governments. They're different responsibility of or desire to be collaborative, right? I mean, the coast isn't owned by any province. But I do think a lot of these guys will have great conversations. I think that they'll be like, they did kind of set a tone of like, we need the federal government to step up, and we need the federal government to fund major projects that mean the most for our respected provinces. I think they'll all unite on wanting the federal government to commit more to Western Canada. So I think that's where they'll find unity. Do I think that the pipeline discussion, especially with the legislation around DRIPA, is going to be very difficult for Eby to navigate? And actually could be the ballot question on the next election. Do you want a pipeline or do you not? And so I don't think he is even playing, do I need to resolve this? He might just need to punt it down the line far enough that it becomes a decision for British Columbians. So in short, I think that they'll talk about some like-minded benefits. I mean, we've already seen BC and Alberta work hard on one of my favorite things, which is wine, and getting that across the border, which, I think was symbolic and great for that. But I do think that there's more that Western Canada can do. And I'm sure that didn't stop those discussions just because of this pipeline. But I could also think that the other provinces had some real talk with Premier Smith about the referendum actually going forward and being like, this really is hard for all of us because of the instability that it brings and the uncertainty. And so I hope that they also share just the like, how can we help you get that message of staying Canada out? How can we reinvigorate that? Because it makes all of Western Canada feel like, not to use David Eby's term, but like awkward, right? So I suspect they had some real talk as well.
I want to get to the referendum, but I have one more question. So Erika, I'm going to stay with you for a second. The tanker moratorium on BC's North Coast, you mentioned the coast. It is the hard line here. It was designed specifically to block the route, the northern route. Does Alberta realistically have a path around that? This is the question that we're asked all the time. This is the curious part. Like, what is the path around the moratorium?
Yeah, I would say that that's like more of a question for the Prime Minister than any Premier right now, because David Eby will hide behind C-48 and the tanker ban, and Danielle Smith will say, well, it's on our list of crappy policies, so we've outlined it here in my 9 lists, so get rid of it. And I think that right now Mark Carney's holding line has always been, well, I introduced Bill C-5 and that's major projects, and therefore, like, I think that we can, it's his workaround. I don't think that that will stay forever as an acceptable answer by either Eby or Premier Smith. And ultimately all the population that calls British Columbia or Alberta home. And I do think he'll need to make that tough decision. And that's where I think some of those, if he doesn't want to use that political capital, where we've now heard rumblings of like a pipeline more southern, we've got Wab Kinew be like, I'll take it, And so it's interesting that I think the premiers will continue to champion, but they've kind of set their positions, and it's going to be up to the Prime Minister on what he does with C-48 more than anyone else.
I agree. I think we have to remember that the tanker ban was brought in by a federal Liberal government, right? Environment Minister, I think he was at the time, David Anderson, a Victoria area MP. And I think one of the things that folks look at when they consider these things in British Columbia is that you look at all the constituencies impacted, that are coastal constituencies. And so, in a minority government situation like the federal Liberals have, I mean, every seat in BC counts, and it will matter where their MPs are at on this. So I that will also be interesting to follow.
Do you think, Raj, then on that note, there's so many Vancouver-based federal Liberal seats. Do you think that Mark Carney's using that in his calculation on the proposed southern route that could potentially happen?
Rachel, you're from in and around these parts. You know what happens when a pipeline debate takes hold in urban Vancouver.
I think former mayors chain themselves to fences or something like that. We have very big activists here.
So, every elected person in Vancouver, including city councilors, start hearing from people when and it's because we have an historically deep, rich environmental movement in this province. Greenpeace was founded on the shores of this fair city. So we're just wired differently for that. British Columbians are. So, and especially urban British Columbians, and especially Vancouver. So I think every elected person in Vancouver will hear about it when people are upset about it. And so I think it's always a calculation when an issue of this magnitude rears its head before an election.
Okay, we're doing it. We're diving into separation. Erika, the moment you've been waiting for. But also, I think about this a lot in the context of British Columbia, maybe because I'm here. But if we are not talking to our southern neighbors and Alberta's about to separate, like, we're really becoming an island over here. Right? Erika, is Alberta going? What is happening? Can you explain to our audience why we're having a referendum on a referendum?
Yeah, I think that's a great reason so that you're not isolated is like a compromise to do so is give a pipeline, you know? And then we're all happy. It's that simple.
No, then BC will leave anyways.
Yeah, if you've watched, I mean, if you're not living Alberta politics, which I do every single day, this shit is confusing, right? There was a referendum. There was signatures to stay for a referendum to stay in Canada. Then there was signatures to leave Canada. And then there was no referendums. And then there was one the premier brought forward, which is a very confusing question. It's not a yes or no. It's like, do you want to stay in Canada or do you want and I'm kind of paraphrasing, want the Alberta government to start their long process about going through a separation referendum. So as of today, it's still going to be called a referendum. People are still looking at it as the severity of a referendum question. But as the premier coins it, it's a policy question about the sentiment of, do you want to have a vote to continue to maybe have another vote? So the challenge I see right now is that I don't know that every Albertan, so I don't expect the rest of Canada to realize what they're actually going to vote on October 19th. I mean, it might be a multiple choice, but also the intention. And so for the separatists, they're still angry because they're not getting their question brought forward because of a judicial decision on the duty to consult with First Nations. And therefore, that's getting held up in the court system. The provincial government is appealing it. And personally, I think it's the right thing to do. However, that doesn't happen overnight. So in the absence of that not being stalled, the provincial government's bringing forward what they're deeming a solution. But again, I think that the argument is once we have the vote, one way or the other, the conversation is going to be stopped. I would argue now in seeing the question that I'm not sure that because it is just a policy question, it doesn't have any constitutional binding impacts, that it's just going to continue this on, but in a different a different channel or form. So do I feel more optimistic this week now that I know that there's for sure a question coming in October, that the conversation will be put to bed in October? I'm less confident now than I was a week ago, given the vagueness of the question. However, if you live in Alberta, it's like this big elephant in the room, and there's so much emotion, both on the economic challenges that we feel we've faced with Ottawa, but also the social or sentiment side of things about being treated unfairly, that we're still going to be dancing this dance for some time. But the conversation has to happen at least at a vote. So I'm happy that even in the fact that I don't love the question or love the intention of this, that there is a question coming forward, because I think it'll make it more clear. And what I'm concerned about is the investor confidence that this can have a high impact on. And so if we can at least have the question, and it's like, we're not doing any, even if it says we want to separate and start looking at that, that's like 5 years out from actually being able to do something, that I hope it will at least bring back some of that investor confidence that this conversation just naturally has caused because of the frustration.
But
so in a nutshell, it's still very confusing though.
For those that live, that, like you said, that aren't watching this every minute of every day, what is the reality on the ground there in terms of the number of people that want to leave Alberta? Like, is this like 10 people in the province that are with really big voices, or is this a serious movement with major numbers?
Yeah, for people that don't live in Alberta, I think there's two things. Is everyone compares it to Quebec, which it's very different than. And the reason I say that is that was a political party and a movement with elected officials running as a separation party. That's not the case here. This is like the most case study of a grassroots movement growing like wildfire. And so 300,000 signatures, which I will point out, even when the premier lowered the signature requirements from like 270 something to 178, these guys still got that number. We also had another petition out that was like, do you want to stay in Canada? And they got like 475,000. So there's a lot of people that have engaged in this process from both sides of the argument. But even with that 300,000, I know lots of people that wouldn't sign it because they just didn't want their information collected. And so I do think it's bigger than most people think. I think there's, and I know it's dangerous, but that like separation curious that might vote no or yes, I want to leave, or in this case, I think it's a no.
Who knows?
I don't know. I don't even know, but like that they're and they're doing it for the intention of sending a message to Ottawa. There is obviously like the whole Brexit send a message too loudly, but I think that there's people that are so frustrated. And you know, I've given Carney the benefit of the doubt. I'm impressed with his willingness to work with Alberta, but I don't know if he's going to like bait and switch this right after and go back and not, you know, repeal these very harmful policies to many sectors and many provinces. And then it's just like, well, I did the one pipeline and now you're back to being the bottom of the list. I think that's something that people truly, one, don't think the pipeline's ever going to get built. And then second, think that this is just like this weird long courtship to be broken up with at the altar.
Okay,
and so there is a bigger, I do think like, I'm not a betting woman, but I think there's numbers that say the true separatist individuals are about 20 to 24%. I don't think anything that anyone can say to them will change their sentiment. But I would think that the number would be more in the 30s on an actual vote. Because I think there's people that are just so like have lost all trust and confidence in the relationship with the federal government.
Raj, you know, David Eby talked a little bit about this week. He came out at a press conference and called Danielle Smith a separatist premier, and that the prime minister is rewarding bad behavior of Alberta, threatening to leave. Is it true? Like, what is happening with British Columbia in terms of potential separation? Like, are we turning into that island? Is that where we're going?
I think some British Columbians would like to be an island, but no, we
have
cannot.
one. We have
lots of islands,
a couple, yeah,
and they mostly vote green. But no, I mean, I think British Columbia is feeling the resource sector pinch, right? I mean, for the forest industry, our longstanding key industry in the province has really been hurting for quite some time now. The American tariffs have made things very uncertain for the remaining forestry jobs in BC. So I think there are things that the premier feels that the boss, the prime minister, is not paying enough attention to. So, I mean, it goes back to the piece around negotiation, right? I mean, everyone is really trying to engage the federal government on things that'll move the economic development projects in their provinces. And, you know, and I think with the Western premiers, you have most premiers who are by and large in lockstep when it comes to resource development. And I think in British Columbia, like I said at the beginning, it's just always a little bit different because there is this added scrutiny from the environmental movement, as well as the scrutiny that comes with not having any settled treaties apart from the 6 that we do have in modern times. So we're a part of Canada, but we have developed differently. And we are still formulating relationships that in other parts of the country have been one and done or are being revisited now. Whereas we are still in the process of bringing the people in British Columbia together. And that is the, you know, unceded, ceded territory question, right? We do have major land use questions in this province that are still unresolved. So anytime there's an issue that comes to the forefront that involves land use, economic development, resource development, there are questions that have to be answered in British Columbia and leaders who have to answer them. So perhaps part of the frustration we hear from Mr. Eby is that he knows this. He knows what previous premiers have gone through. And, you know, and I will say this too about my good friends, John Horgan and Rachel Notley, who were of the same partisan stripe, who even worked together in Victoria, who were also at odds on the Trans-Canada. So I think we have to recognize that about BC, and it takes a little longer to get things done here because the scrutiny is always a little higher.
We always forget that this history repeats itself in this context. Very, very good point. Okay, I want to end on one final question here to both of you. If you were advising the Premier of Alberta or the Premier of British Columbia currently on how to navigate the relationship with the other province, what advice would you give to these current premiers? I'll start with you, Raj.
So I always start with, I have many cousins in Alberta, and I mean that genuinely. I do. We are not that different, Alberta and BC. As people, we are remarkably similar. Um, Somehow, Alberta, which is also a very urban province, by the way, tends to have this image that they're a bit more Western. They're a bit more country than BC, and it's not true. I would say British Columbians, Albertans, by and large, and especially if you're a British Columbian like me, born and raised in Kamloops, we're a lot alike. And so I think the Premier has to remember that. He also has to speak for all British Columbians, not just the ones in urban Vancouver, and not just the ones in Point Grey, the constituency that he represents in Vancouver, right? So British Columbia is a big province. New Democrats don't have as many seats in rural BC as they would like. And so I would encourage him to keep in mind moderate New Democrats like me, who like economic development, but also recognize what it takes to get projects through in British Columbia.
All right, Erika, what's your advice to Danielle?
Yeah, well, I'd say for both of them, like, come to the table with solutions, not just problems, and come with solutions that have the opportunity to so that you can both compromise and find a happy medium. I'd say, like, right now, I think both leaders could benefit from that. I think that Premier Smith, like we said, is way more vocal on what she's asking, and that I haven't really seen from EB what, besides there's no proponent or I don't want this, what the alternatives are. And then, like, jointly come together with a solution on the pipeline, but also find areas where they can work together to build that confidence for the voters that they both represent, to show that progress is happening and that they can work together, as opposed to full circle back to the water cooler, instead of like bitching and moaning at each other at the water cooler and then having the boss have to come in and break you up and figure it out for you. I don't think that either premier, especially given their ideologies and the interests of their constituents, want to be told by Ottawa exactly what to do. Yep. So if they don't solve the problems for themselves, someone else is going to.
Well, we don't envy Mark Carney for having to figure this all out, but we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Erika and Raj. And up next, we will be right back with an interesting look at the Canadian Bankers Association and how they're working towards financial literacy and helping protect Canadians against fraud. We'll be right back. And now, a word from our title sponsor, DoorDash. We're proud to share the Beyond a Ballot continues to be powered by DoorDash. Just like we go beyond a ballot, DoorDash goes beyond delivery. This week, we're sharing the story of a Toronto institution, Pi. The goal has always been simple for the team at Pi: make their food and experience accessible, however people choose to enjoy it. They kept hearing the same thing from customers, craving for their Northern Thai dishes at home, whether after a long workday or during busy family routines. DoorDash has helped make that a reality. Bonita, Pi's marketing manager, has seen DoorDash become more than just a delivery platform over the years, helping bring Pi's food, culture, and experience into people's homes across the city, maintaining the quality and consistency you would expect while dining in. Most importantly, it's helped Pi stay connected to loyal regulars and reach new customers, becoming part of their everyday routines, not just special occasions. Bonita's story highlights how DoorDash can help restaurants like Pi grow their reach while staying true to what makes them special. Natalie joins us now. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. We're so thrilled to have you here and to talk about this very important campaign that the Canadian Bankers Association has launched. It's called Banks Are on Your Side. And at a time where we see financial scams are on the rise, we've all heard about them. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the campaign and what it is that CBA is trying to accomplish with it?
So the campaign runs year long, and the main objective is to show how Canada's banks contribute to the economy and can help unlock the potential of our country, and also help to establish a strong, resilient foundation for prosperity for Canada. For that, we do a year-long campaign with different messages, and fraud and scams being a key issue in Canada. One of the messages that we want to communicate is how Canada can protect itself, how consumers can help and recognize fraud and scams, but also how our elected officials can act. So throughout the year, our messages help build awareness. They are, helping political people getting more familiar with some of the ways that we are helping to protect against fraud and scams, but also how they can help their constituents. And that's one of the messages, but throughout the years, we try to help keep our priorities at the forefront.
You talked about fraud prevention. We also know financial literacy are both central to this campaign. Tell us what CBA's role is here.
So fraud prevention and financial literacy go hand in hand, and they both work together to help Canadians better protect themselves, but also better plan for their future. And what we do is provide Canadians with different tools so that they can better educate themselves. They can have access to resources that are free, agnostic, and reliable all year long to be able to either read about the different types of scams, read about things like budgeting and retirement planning, etc. But the more you are educated, the more you are going to be able to recognize and detect fraud and avoid it.
We believe in that too. The more educated you are, the more powerful you are. So that's a great goal and really important resources. But just going back to the number of scams that we're seeing in Canada, they are rising. As we noted, they're also increasing in their sophistication. And women, specifically women in our audience, are often dealing with family finances or the finances of aging parents. And a bunch of my mom's friends have had these issues with fraud. And we, as the women taking care of the sandwich generation, are often caught in those crosshairs. So what is it that the CBA is doing to help Canadians from these scams, and what should women listening know about how their bank can protect them?
So as I mentioned, the CBA produces all sorts of resources. So we have toolkits, we have articles and quizzes, and a lot of these resources are designed for specific audiences. You have toolkits for older Canadians, for newcomers, for students, as well as for small business owners, for example. So you can find that in our resource library. The CBA also helped to stand up the Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition. It's an organization with multiple organizations that have multiple sectors. You've got the banking sector, telecommunications, big tech, law enforcement, as well as government, working together to help to fight against scams and fraud. And one of the things that the coalition has done is launch a national campaign that is helping to educate Canadians. And the campaign is based on 3 simple steps, and it's stop, check, and talk. So 3 little things, but reminding people to do these things and to look into what they're about to click or who they're talking to before they do so that they can better protect themselves. We also have a campaign at the CBA that reminds people how your bank will interact with you and how it will not interact with you. So basically how they communicate, so that when you get a call, you might, what is going to make you more suspicious? And again, going back to the stop, check, and talk, maybe taking a moment and going to check whether it's really your bank calling or asking you these questions, and verifying that before you make any action.
For sure. People often talk about financial literacy in relation to political literacy because money is power. What financial literacy resources does CBA offer, and how can our audience in particular access them?
So going back to the library of resources, we have a whole bunch of articles about, I mentioned budgeting earlier, retirement planning, responsible credit. So you can find all these resources on cba.ca. We also have seminars, free seminars for both students and seniors called Your Money. And we basically have volunteer bankers that will go and meet with a classroom or a group of seniors. So if you're a teacher or you work with groups of seniors, you can contact us either via the website or at yourmoney@cba.ca by email to request that seminar. As I mentioned, it's free, and it is basically sharing information with specific to those two audiences, so that we can help help people better plan for making smarter decisions.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for all of this information. And for anyone that wants to find these tools and use these tools, they can go on the website that you mentioned. Natalie Bergeron, thank you very much, Vice President of Media Strategy and Communications. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. New episodes air every Friday.
Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram and find us at beyondaballot.com.